so that we can hear that little voice, that little whisper saying, maybe consider doing this, or maybe consider doing this to improve your overall relationship with me, or maybe you need to do this to improve your relationship with such and such or so and so. So we get a lot of insight if we'll take the time to reflect during this time. So we see in the Shemitah that it's so much more than simply letting the land rest every 7th year. We have to find our rest within the divisions of Yehovah's instruction, so that we too will rest our land in order to be able to bear better fruit both spiritually and physically. Okay? So we see that there's a lot more in the Shemitah than, 7 years, I gotta let the land rest. We say that this particular commandment is only for the land of Israel. So we're not in the land of Israel. How does it apply to us? How can we, what instruction? Because we have the same Torah as they have in Israel. The same instruction that they have in Israel, we have here. What is Elohim saying to us? Because it's all about our developing a relationship with our Elohim. So, another important event found in this Parsha is the year of Jubilee. And we'll consider some of the verses in this portion in order to better understand what happens when we find our rest in Yehovah Elohim. The year of Jubilee is another one of those things that is just skimmed over. And, 49 years, and then on the 50th year, you take a break and you let everybody go, you give back property, you let the land rest. But what does that mean to us? What significance does that have in our life and in our relationship with our Elohim? So this starts at verse 8, and we're not going to go through all the verses. There are 4 verses in the middle of this that deal with how to treat other people in business affairs. And basically those verses say, don't cheat anybody. And those are things that are important, but for the most part, we're going to take a look at what's the mechanics of this Jubilee. What does it mean for us? In verse 8 says, and you shall number 7 Sabbaths of years unto yourself, 7 times 7. And there shall be unto you the days of 7 Sabbaths of years, even 49 years. So it's a lot of math. That 7 times 7 is usually always going to be 49. So
Normally.
So now we've just considered the Shemitah, and in that we've realized that we have to take time away from our physical lives to spend quality time with Yehovah Elohim in order to better our spiritual lives. This verse helps us to understand more clearly the importance of this, and also to see what happens to us when we do take this time to take this rest. We have 7 sabbatical years, and so this is a lot of reflection going on. This verse speaks of 7 Shemitahs, which is a total of 49 years. In this number, we get an idea of what transformation we go through. In 40, we have the numerical value of Mem, a letter that represents the word of Yehovah. Now, 40 is also the number of transition, moving from one stage of life to another. Mem also has a final form in the closed Mem. It's the letter that represents Mashiach. We say that the open Mem represents those things that we can read topically. The closed Mem represents those things that we need the anointing of Elohim to help us to see. We will not receive the fullness of Torah without Mashiach. So Mashiach is the one that helps us to understand. So Mashiach, or the closed Mem, is a letter that represents Mashiach, which is the anointing of Yehovah. So in 40, we can consider that it represents a transition that takes place by and through the word and anointing of Yehovah. In the number 9, we have the letter Tet, which represents, again, the choice of showing reverence to Elohim through His Word. If we look at the Tet, all the Hebrew letters are composed of Hebrew letters. The Tet is composed of the Zion and a Vav bowing to the Zion. The Zion is the 7th letter of the alphabet. It represents the rest that we find in Elohim. Zion means weapon, but the root of Zion is Zan, which means nourishment. So Zion is a representation of the rest, the nourishment, and the protection that we find in the Word of Elohim. And we'll see this a little bit more in a few minutes, but we bow to our Elohim. We have a choice in life to bow to our Elohim through His Word and reverence Him, or if we look at the Tet, it also looks like the Nachash. It looks like the serpent. That's the other part of our choice, is that we can crawl on our bellies like the Nachash, eating the dust of the ground, the things that are temporary in the world. So this is a choice of showing reverence to Elohim through His Word, or living like the serpent and crawling on one's belly to eat the dust of the ground. So we can conclude that our taking time out during the Shemitah to spend quality time with Yehovah, our Elohim, aids in our spiritual growth and well-being, and ultimately brings us to a point of transition through the Word and anointing of Yehovah, where we seek to live a life of reverence to Elohim through His Word. In this, we reach the point of Jubilee. Verse 9 says, "Then you shall make proclamation with the blast of the horn on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall you make proclamation with the horn throughout all your land." This verse kind of gives us more insight as to what 49 does for us. The 10th day of the 7th month, in the day of atonement. This is Yom Kippur. Why are we to blow the shofar on Yom Kippur during Jubilee? This is to be done when the 49 years are complete, and to bring the 50th year, or Jubilee, into the limelight. Jubilee means ram, or ram's horn.
Wow.
Let's consider the numbers involved here. We have 10. There's a Yod, the truth, power, and the ability of Yehovah to act on His Word, which is Zion. 7, the rest, nourishment, and protection that we find in the Word. And 49, as we've said, is represents our transition throughout Nun, throughout our life. And it's also a spiritual transition. We take these 3 letters. The gematria of these 3 letters combined is 67. 67 is the gematria. If we spell out the letter Zion, we come out with the gematria of 67. But 67 is also the gematria of the word Bina, which is understanding. So what are we transitioning here? We're going from simply knowledge to wisdom to Bina, which means understanding. If we enter in and stay focused on the Word, take the time to rest, take the time to solemnly, the word that doesn't exist in the Hebrew, taking the time to be serious about what we're doing. So this brings us closer to Yehovah Elohim through His Word and anointing. The proclamation thus made here is that Yeshua is our Jubilee. Through Yeshua, we are restored, redeemed, and delivered from bondage, or from the bondage of sin and death, being transitioned into a life of reverence to Yehovah Elohim through Him. Yeshua is our Jubilee. This year of Jubilee is a representation of the restoration, redemption, and deliverance of Yehovah. And then verse 10, it finally says, "And you shall set apart the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. That's written on the Liberty Bell. Anybody wants that little piece of history. "It shall be a jubilee unto you, and you shall return every man unto his possession, and you shall return every man unto his family." find liberty. Slaves set free, property returned to its rightful owner. Slaves allowed to go back to their families. The 50th year is to be set apart. Okay? Most of our translations say the 50th year is to be holy. Holy means to exalt something, to raise something up, to make it divine. This year is to be set apart. Kodesh is a word that means to set something apart, to make it distinct. There really isn't a word for holy in Hebrew. We are set apart. This day is set apart to Elohim. We're not a holy nation that's to be exalted. We are Kodashim. We are set apart to our Elohim. It's a very, very different thing. But the 50th year is to be set apart. If we are truly to be the children of Israel, our life must belong to Elohim. And as we will see in this verse, or in the verses that are to follow, that all life belongs to Yahuwah. Now, in setting ourselves apart to Yahuwah Elohim and receiving and believing in Yeshua, his restoration, redemption, and deliverance that delivers us from sin and its wages death, we receive the proclamation. This is from the word kera, that also means appointment and calling. That we have liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. We are freed from slavery and are returned to our ahutzato, that means possession. But this word also means a possession through inheritance. Do we have an inheritance? Was that inheritance lost? Can that inheritance be redeemed? There's 3 questions to consider. Possession through inheritance. In the phrase, and you shall return every man unto his family, we have a word ish for man. And we remember our concept that this word represents our physical worship. For those of you that weren't here for that study on woman, we said that Adam was separated into Ish and Isha. Okay? That Ish, the man, said, and she shall be called Isha, because she was taken out of Ish. This gives us an idea that Ish is the physical worship, the prayer, the study, the praise, and that from Ish comes Isha, the spiritual, how am I trying to say this? The spiritual stuff that comes out of prayer. Okay? The spiritual that comes from prayer, that comes from study. And we said that the transgression occurred because Isha was separated from Ish. If you take spirit and it's not backed up by study, by prayer, by praise, then our spirit is weak. And what happens? It can be deceived. And this is why we have a lot of deception going on. Say spiritual manifestations of things that simply aren't so. So, with that being said, we have the word for ish, for man, and if our concept that this word represents our physical worship is understood, then we consider the word for his family is el mishpacheto, which is from a feminine root, which is shivcha, that means made, but also means to spread out. This word has 2 roots, one being shafa, that means to be swept by the wind, and the other is a masculine noun, which is shepifon, which means a serpent, which comes from the root shu, which means to overwhelm and to desire. It also means to bruise and to crush, and it also means to cover. If we look closely and take all this into consideration, we can get an idea that the inheritance was lost through transgression. The woman, the spiritual side of Adam, away from Ish, was deceived by the serpent, being overwhelmed with desire for the fruit that was forbidden, and she ate. And she gave to her husband, and he also ate of it. The man and the woman tried to cover up the transgression. What did? They put on fig leaves. Fig leaves is a representation of plenty. It's a representation of wealth. But it's also a representation of trying to hide something. They tried to cover up with their own false perception of everything's okay. But what happened is that the transgression was discovered by Elohim. Then he asked, "What have you done?" The woman was told that her seed's heel would be bruised, but that the serpent's head would be crushed. So we kind of get an idea of something here that's a little bit more than the man shall return to his family. That we get an idea that through the restoration, redemption, and deliverance from sin and death that's brought on by the Jubilee, that true worship and spirit are reunited. In this we understand what it means to us today that the slaves are set free. Yeshua is our Jubilee, and only through Yeshua can we be restored, redeemed, and delivered back to the Father as a clean vessel for his use. We read things externally. We say, okay, well, we're giving property back. People can go back to their families. Everybody's going to live happily ever after.
Right.
At the end of the year, they go back and do everything they're doing. But everything in Torah is an instruction to us as to how to improve our relationship, but it's also an instruction to us as to how redemption is coming and what it means to us, how to believe, how to receive. So we see this in the underlying Hebrew that is actually telling us the story, and it's also telling us about redemption. So in verse 11, we go on, a jubilee shall be that 50th year be unto you. You shall not sow, neither reap that which grows of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of the undressed vine. Now, we're going to kind of leave this verse alone a little bit. In its simplest terms, we have to understand we cannot provide for our own restoration, redemption, and deliverance. And we're going to see this further in these following verses. Verse 12 says, "For it is a jubilee. It is to be set apart unto you. You shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. Wherefore you shall do my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them, and you shall dwell in the land in safety." Here's our protection. "And the land shall yield her fruit, and you shall eat until you have enough, and dwell therein in safety." Again, there's our protection, but there's our nourishment. "And if you say, What shall we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we may not sow, nor gather in our increase. Then I will command my blessing upon you in the 6th year." Okay, we're going to do the math here in a minute. "Then I will command my blessing upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth produce for 3 years, and you shall sow in the 8th year, and eat of the produce, the old store, until the 9th year. Until her produce come in, you shall eat the old store." Who is going to provide all this for us? Well, if we take 6 plus 3 plus 8 plus 9, we come up with 26. 26 is the gematria of the name of Yahuwah. So it is Yahuwah who takes care of us. But in this, the 6th year, and it shall bring forth produce for 3 years. 6, the numerical value of the Vav, which is a representation of humankind. It'll bring forth for 3 years, there's the Gimel, representation of stability, of wealth. That the wealth, the stability of Yahuwah will hold us up. "And you shall sow in the 8th year." Okay, here we have a responsibility. You shall sow in the 8th year. 8 is which letter? Chet. Okay, what do we have in Chet? The letter itself, Chet,